Okay, so it's my privilege and it's my honor, and I say that sincerely and from the bottom of my heart to get to introduce our speaker this morning. We were talking yesterday, and I've known Jason and his family for 13 years in a good way, right? It doesn't always mean in a good way, but in this case, in a good way, I feel like I've known Jason even longer. We have similar backgrounds in that we both grew up in a similar area. We have a lot of things in common. We were laughing about some of those things last night, some of the stories. And so, like I said, it's a privilege for me to have this opportunity to introduce Jason. And the one thing I wanted to tell you about him is this. Jason and his family are the best example that I can think of practical Christianity. And what I mean by that is Jason and Becca and their girls, every day they live out their faith, right? It's not something that they do talk about it, but it's not something they just talk about. And even if they never told you anything, if you just observe how they live their life, the way that they care for people, the way that they love each other, and the way that people interact with them and the impact they have on the community that they live in, you would know that there's something special, something unique, something different about them. I was, sharing this with Jason a little bit last night, and I've shared it before, right? I've been to the town where Jason lives. I'm not 100% sure I could live there all the time, to be honest with you. And they do. And when we travel around town, everywhere we go, everyone we interact with, they interact with Jason out of a place of deep respect. So we go around town, people will say, Buona Jason, where have you been, right? And that's like saying Master Jason. That's a sign of respect. And to me, that speaks highly of who Jason is and his family and the impact they have on their community. So with all that, I'll shut up now and introduce Jason and have him come on up. This is Jason Witt. He's a missionary from our church and a dear friend.
You can leave that one for the girls when they come up, I guess. All right. Good morning. It's good to be with you guys again. As he said, my name is Jason. My family's down there. They're going to come up in just a second. I just wanted to say hi, and then we wanted to play a little video for you, so you have a point of reference to understand when we talk about things. You have at least a picture of how things are, and it's an older video, so we'll have the opportunity to be able to update you on some of the things that have happened since that video has been made. So I'll just ask them to play that, and then we'll come up and share some more. When we started this farm, they would tell you they thought we were crazy for the idea to even start a farm this far away from the river because nobody's ever done that. And, it's 750 meters from the river. They looked at the soil and they're like, this is like sand. In 2008, there was a needs assessment done in this village, and the thing they asked for was a hospital. And they asked for a hospital because they said that all the moms, the pregnant ladies were dying on the way to the hospital because there was no prenatal care. The road was really bad. There was no hospital close by, so they were carrying them with donkey carts, and they were carrying them in wheelbarrows. We partnered with another organization to do the clinic. Well, then they gave us a big piece of land, and so we also asked if it would be possible if we could have a farm, that we could teach them how to farm, we could provide jobs, we could use the farm to support the clinic. There are 14 full-time employees from this community that work in this farm, so they're salaried employees. And then also people in the village work here doing small jobs and get paid for day labor also. So it's more than just the 14 full-time, it's also the different people that benefit. We have to water all 5 days that we work because it's so hot. The farm is big. We've actually maxed out the water pump that we have. So if we wanted to expand more, we'd have to get a bigger water pump or a second water pump. And that pump puts out about 5,000 gallons an hour. What we've tried to do too is also create a small ecosystem here. So we try to use everything. We have animals, we have goats, we have rabbits, we have fish. We're getting ready to get into dairy cows, into chickens, but we use all of that. So it's like we take the things from the farm, the weeds, the offcuts, the things that we don't sell or harvest, we feed those to the animals. We take the manure from the animals, we put it back in the soil. So it creates that permaculture. We're using everything. And we have some programs with our workers that we build houses for them. We would build a house that costs about $2,000 to build, and we'd only make them pay back about a quarter of that cost. And then the other 3/4 we look for donor funding for. So for about 2 years, we deduct $20 a month from their salary, and they get a semi-permanent house, a house that will probably last them 30 years. We also have a work for school fees program where the high school boys or girls can come and work in the holiday months, and then we pay for them to go to high school. I see the farm as an allegory of what God's doing in their lives. It's like we started with hard, rocky soil without a lot of nutrition where plants couldn't survive, and that's a lot like the way that their hearts are. The hearts are hard, and so it takes a long time for that to be prepared. We've never known the problems that they know. Like, we've never experienced what it's like to live these hard lives that they live. The concept of running water, the concept of electricity, of having medical care available, and just the things we take for granted. It's about taking people from one place to another place, and not just, from point A to point B, but how are you empowering people? How are you equipping them with the skills that they need in order to grow, to go on and do more? Just like when we plant physical seeds and fruit, it's not us that we just do the things that science says we have to do, but it's in the universe that God created. And in the same way, we keep planting these seeds and putting the water and tilling up the soil of people's hearts. As much as we love to see the ground produce fruit, we want to see, the work produce fruit. We want to see fruit in people's lives. We want to see these people know the love of Jesus in a real way. We want to see their lives impacted and changed. And we are slowly, starting to see those things.
Hello, everybody. Is it working? Can you hear me now? Okay. We are so happy to be here. We always feel so welcomed by you all when we come here to Wisconsin, and I think we come pretty much every home assignment. So like every 4 years, we come, and you just open up your arms and you take very good care of our family. Last time we were on home assignment was 2020, that crazy year, and we were able to come to America on February 29th without any issues. There was no problems, and we landed in New York. And that year was I'm sure you all have unique experiences. My mom was diagnosed with a terminal 4 stomach cancer, and so by the time she found out, it was just like 6 to 7 weeks that we had with her. And we were so grateful to be here because Kenya closed its borders. And if I would have found out the news when we were already there, I wouldn't have been able to fly to be by her side. So it was just very, very precious memories we were able to make with her. And she was a strong, strong believer. So she was constantly just like reminding us the confidence that this is not all there is to life right here on earth, but there is eternal life that's coming. And she was just so assuring and so confident that she would meet her Savior and her best friend, Jesus Christ. So Jason and I were actually with her as she took her last breath, and it was like I miss her and I want to be calling her up, but at the same time, like I know she's not sad. I know she's with the Lord, and I will get to see her again. So as we returned to Kenya after like having to bury my mom, we the farm workers put money together and they like welcomed us back, and they said, we're so sorry about your mom passing. And like one of the men like that is really poor, you know, he said, if we could have been there with you, we would have. And I knew like could never afford a plane ticket, but it meant so much to me. And like in Kenya, you do a lot of speeches, like at the farm that we have a place where there's lots of seats. So we got to sit down, and then I was able to share about my mom's legacy, and I was able to share like she knew with confidence where she was going when she died. In 2 Corinthians, it talks about us here on earth groaning for the heavenly dwelling. Like that's where we fix our eyes to, the heavenly dwelling and groaning. And she really was ready. She had no unfinished business. So I was challenging the Muslim farm workers, like, I want that for you. The same way that my mom was telling me these words to kind of like comfort my heart as I was having to say goodbye to her. Like, I want you to know without a doubt what's going to happen when you die. So I just challenge that to all of us, like where you work, your relatives, to be able to tell them like what you know for sure, that one day you will be with Jesus again, and that you long for everyone to know that too.
Hi, my name is Righteous, and I'm 16 years old. One opportunity we have to do in Kenya is we go and visit people, and so you can create friendships with the people you buy groceries from. So one of these ladies, I love her so much, and we've created a friendship by just buying vegetables and fruits, and we call her Oyo in Somali, which means mom. So it's like a term of respect. So like when I greet her, I say Habari Oyo. It's like, how are you, mom? To like just show that respect, because we've been going to her for many years, every week, several times. So she really sticks up for us and really like receives our respect. So like one thing we have to face is there's some people that are crazy because they're like taking a drug, eating a drug. So sometimes they'll come up to you and they'll want to bother you or ask for money. And so she really like sticks up for us, and she'll chase them away to like protect us. So I really appreciate that, and I really respect her, and so glad to have like created this friendship.
Hi everyone, my name is Avea. I'm 14 years old. Also, if you guys want to hear more about our lives, we do have a YouTube channel, us four. It's called The Witt Sisters, so you should look that up. But I have a story that I want to tell. So we have a worker in Mombasa. His name is Abdi, and we work alongside with him. And he told us this story about meeting a 6-year-old man who said he wanted to give his life to Abdi's God. So he started telling the story. He started from Adam and Eve. He got to Adam and Eve, and the 6-year-old man was like, yes, I want to follow this God. I want to give my life to him. And he's like, I haven't even got to when Jesus was born. So then he tells the story, and then Jesus is born. He's like, yep, that's the God. I want to give my life over to him. He's like, he just was born. You have to wait till like he lives his life. So then he told the whole story, and the guy was like, yes, I want to give my life over to this God. So they prayed. He gave his life over, and then afterward, Abdi was asking him, what made you so like persistent on wanting to give your life to this God, because you didn't even hear the whole story? And he was saying that when I was 11 years old, a missionary came into my village. He gave me a new shirt, and it was the first new piece of clothing I'd ever received in my life.
And I knew that that God who had been pursuing me from when I was 11 years old and gave me that first piece of clothing was the same God that you were talking about. And so because of this, on Christmas, we go to the farm, and we have all of the farm workers' families come over to the farm on Christmas, and we have plays and skits and food. And then after that, we give all of the kids, all of the girls a new dress, and all of the boys a new shirt and a soccer ball, and the girls get a doll, so that maybe one day they can remember that God has been pursuing them since they were young, and they can really want to give their lives over to him.
Hi, I'm Karis, and I'll be 13 on Tuesday.
I'm Samara, and I'm 11. One of the things that we do for the farm workers is my dad builds houses for them. And after they build the houses, we paint them. We like to paint them the football teams. We have the Bills, the Washington Commanders, the Miami Dolphins, and the Green Bay Packers.
Excellent. Good. Like I said, I wanted you to see that video so that I could share some of the updates with you. And some of the things I talked about in the video, I said we had 14 full-time employees. We now have 19 full-time employees. And I told you that we maxed out our water pump and we needed a new water pump. Well, God provided a bigger water pump. I said we were going to get chickens. We have chickens. I said we were going to get dairy cows. We still don't have dairy cows yet, but we're closer than we were before. I talked about the house building projects. And so at that point, we made that video. We built 3 houses. Now we built 11 houses. And so, God's been really providing for what's been going on. I talked about a school fees program. It's a program where these kids who would never have the opportunity to go to high school can go to school, and then when holiday months, they come and work on the farm, and then we find donors to subsidize and pay for their school fees. But they have something in the game. They're working for their education, so they'll value that, and they'll maintain their dignity and their honor as they educate themselves. So we have 24 kids in high school right now, boys and girls. And this is a community that doesn't value the education of the girl. And so we're able to have an impact with those kids. And one of the most exciting things is, I was saying we're slowly starting to see, we've seen our first 4 believers after 15 years. So on January 1st, we baptized our first 4 believers on New Year's Day. They came together, and so what we're seeing is the early formation of an indigenous church in the area. And these are all Muslim background believers from Muslim families, probably fourth generation Muslim, because Islam came into this part of Kenya probably in the 40s. So it's like their great-great-grandfathers accepted Islam from an animistic background. And now what we're seeing is a transition. And what we're hoping, what we're praying for is that all this stuff that we're doing is just pointing towards Jesus. It's like this neon sign that's blinking, just Jesus' name. And like these younger kids are starting to ask questions like, how come we only got these things when people came and started talking about Jesus? Islam's been here for 70 plus years, and my dad didn't go to high school. And my grandfather didn't go to high school, but I'm going to high school. My parents didn't live in a cinder block house, but now I live in a cinder block house. And we look at all these things, and they take a ton of resources and a ton of time. There's no if and or but about that. There's a lot of resources that go into these things. But at the end of the day, these are the things that we can do to point towards Jesus tangibly and love people in a practical way in an area of the world where they wouldn't be friendly to you, to say, sure, I want to sit down and listen to you present the gospel to me. The same way if a Muslim came and knocked on your door and was like, hey, I'm here to present Islam and convert you to Islam, you'd be like, no, thanks. You can go next door or another neighborhood or maybe another country. But in the same way, they're not friendly to us in that way. If we come in and we're like, hey, we're here to bring you the gospel of Jesus and transform your lives, they're like, no, you can go do that somewhere else. So we have to be able to do things that add value to the community that allow us to have a presence in that community, because without presence, we can't do anything. So a lot of times I feel like I spend a lot of my time doing good things, which all good things come from God, and I know that, but a lot of times I'm still just like, Lord, am I supposed to be preaching more? Am I supposed to be teaching at classes on systematic theology to these people? And no, of course, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing or what we're supposed to be doing, but I think just living our lives in a manner worthy of the calling that God has placed on us is the calling that we have. So one of the things you'll hear me talk about a lot, if you spend any time with me all, is just obedience. And that's one of the most important things that I think that we do as followers of Christ is just obey him. We have a table in the back, so after the service, if you're interested, we have these rubber band bracelets that will say pray for the Witts and pray for G-Town to remind you to pray. We have some prayer cards in the back to remind you to pray also. It also has all our contact information on the back, so you can follow us, email us, whatever you want to do. If you want to join our support team, all back there. And then we have some different things from Kenya. We have a poster of the president that my children wanted to show you. So feel free to pass by there, and that's the business side of things. So now I want to get into the Word, and we're going to talk about what the Lord, what I feel like the Lord wants to say, what He's been saying to me, what He's been saying in my life, because I'm just going to teach you what He teaches me. So if you feel offended, don't get offended, because He's teaching me this. I'm just sharing with you what He's teaching me. So let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for your Word. Thank you for the gift and the ability to be able to come before you, to be able to just bask in your presence, to have this beautiful gift that you've given us called the Bible, that we can follow, that can guide our lives, that can guide our footsteps and show us everything that we need to do and how we need to live. I ask that you would speak this morning, that your Holy Spirit would fall in this place, and that your words would fall on soft ground and multiply 60, 30, 60, 100-fold. In Jesus' name, amen. So what we're going to look at is John. We're going to look at John chapter 9, but first, I want to give you like a crash course of the Gospel of John up until this point, because I think the context of where Jesus is at this point in time and what's been going on is pretty important to this point in the story. So when we look at John as a gospel, it's a different gospel. It's one that we would not conclude in the synoptic gospels, which is Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Those have a lot of like syncretistic aspects, but John is kind of its own thing, even the way it starts. He's just like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and you're just like, what? All different. You know, the other one's like, here's the genealogy, and this is what happened, and Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and you know, all these things, but John starts, in the beginning was the Word, and he goes straight to John the Baptist, and then John the Baptist meets Jesus, and he says, behold, here comes the Lamb of God to take away the sins of the world, and then Jesus starts calling disciples. That's chapter 1, basically. So chapter 2 is the first miracle. Jesus is at the wedding, they run out of wine. Mary comes to Jesus and says, hey, they're out of wine. And he's like, woman, it's not yet my time. And I'm like, man, I don't know, if I talked to my mom like that, I might have lost a tooth. But, so he's like, but what does he do? He obeys her, right? And then the other people are like, what does he fill up? You want us to fill up the water jars, the cisterns? And so they do it, and then boom, turns into wine. Then from there, he goes and chases everybody out of the temple, right? Chapter 2. That's the end of chapter 2, where he's like, get out. You know, you've made my father's house into a den of thieves. Chapter 3, super famous chapter in the Bible, Nicodemus. Nicodemus comes. Jesus explains to him, you got to be born again. Nicodemus is confused. How do I go back into my mother's womb? That's not what it means. We have John 3:16, for God so loved the world, the verse that all of us are very familiar with. Chapter 4, John is the woman at the well. Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well. She's all confused about who he is. He's like speaking in metaphors, and she doesn't get it. And she's fetching water at the middle of the day because she doesn't want to see anybody, because she doesn't live a lifestyle that really wants to interact with people because they judge her and they're harsh to her and they're mean to her. But Jesus meets her and he talks to her, and she's like, you're not even supposed to be talking to me because I'm a woman. First of all, I'm a Samaritan woman. And so then he explains to her, well, if you knew who it was that's talking to you, ask me to give you water and you never have to fetch water again. She's like, well, give me this water. Because I don't want to keep coming here. And the next thing you know, the disciples come back and they're like, why is he talking to her? He's not supposed to be talking, but nobody wants to say anything. Then later on, they're like, hey, we brought you some food. He's like, I'm not hungry, I already ate. You don't know anything about my food. They're super confused, as they are a lot of times. So I feel like I can relate to these guys. I live my life in a state of confusion at times. It might look like I have everything together, but I really don't. When I'm in the middle of things, I'm like, Lord, what are you doing? What is happening? And then like later on, I'm like, oh, now I see. Rebecca usually sees it a couple days before me, and that's normal. I would say that goes with her just being more holy than I am, probably. So in this case, the woman at the well, then Jesus goes from there and he heals one of the Pharisee official's sons, In chapter 5, Jesus is going to visit that healing pool near Bethesda, and the guy's laying on the mat. He can't get in the water, and he's like, every time the water stirs to try to get in, somebody gets in front of me. And Jesus tells him, pick up your mat, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. And so he does. And this is where a lot of the trouble starts for him from this point, because that's where the Pharisees come in at this point. And they're like, hey, what is this guy doing? Because we know Nicodemus came in chapter 3, he came at night, who was a teacher. So we have that part where he gets in the pool and he gets healed. And then Jesus teaches a little bit more with more authority. He talks about his equivalence, his equivalence with God, his dependence on God, like the authority of the Son. In chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000. After he feeds the 5,000, he walks on water. So we're there. So and then he starts talking to them after the walking on water. He starts talking about the bread of life, which could be easily confusing because even now you read it, sometimes you're like, man, imagine if you were those guys. Like, we got the whole story. But what if you're just those guys sitting in front of him? He's telling you, unless you partake of my flesh and drink of my blood. And they're like, what? So, think about that. We got the big picture, so we're like, oh, yeah, it totally makes sense. But if you were sitting in front of him at that time, you're like, all right, things are getting weird. I was down with it until you start eating people, like that kind of stuff. So, but they didn't know. So then we get to chapter 7. In chapter 7, Jesus goes to the Feast of Booths. I always find this very fascinating. We have all these different feasts and these different things within the Jewish religion, in the Old Testament. The first time we hear about the Feast of Booths is in Exodus. So in Exodus, the Feast of Booths was instituted so that they would remember when they were in exile, when they lived in tents, because that's what a booth is. Like when we think of a booth, we're like, hey, let's put up little games and throw darts at it, or you never win anything and spend like $1,000. You go home with a $5 stuffed animal, So it's not that kind of booth. It's a tent. That's what it means. So it's like they would have this feast where they would go and stay in tents to remember how God kept them in the wilderness, how he delivered them, how he watched over them. So, of course, Israel stepped away from God, right? And then kind of was doing their own thing. He was calling them back, and we see this come back again in Nehemiah, when Nehemiah goes and rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem. After the walls are rebuilt, and Ezra reads from the book of the law, after the walls are rebuilt, then they reinstitute the Feast of Booths. So they go and they move out of the city where they built the walls around Jerusalem and go into tents to remember who God was. Now, I have a funny story attached to this because we live in a place where people kind of live in booths. They live in tents. You saw some of those houses, those dome thatch roofed manadas is what we call them. So it was a time we had a team coming from the U.S. to come and do a construction project at the farm to build something. So at one point in time, we were preparing the ground, sweeping the ground because we have lots of thorns and stuff. So we're like, for sweeping the ground because these guys were going to come and stay in the tents there at the farm because at that point we didn't have any buildings. And so they came and they were going to stay in these tents. And then I told the guys, I said, hey, we need to get firewood. And they looked at me really confused. And I said, yeah, we need firewood. They said, well, what do you need firewood for? Because you already hired our wives to cook dinner for these guys. So why would you need firewood? And so I'm like, well, this is going to sound really weird. I said, in America, we sometimes go and stay in the bush, in the wilderness, and sleep in tents. And sometimes we make fires. Oh, do you cook on those fires? Well, sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. We just kind of sit around and stare at it. And they're like, wait a minute. You mean you live in a house that has running water and electricity, you don't need to cook on a fire, and then for fun, you go live in the bush, make a fire you don't cook on, and sleep in a tent that you don't have to? They're like, we don't understand. If we had that, we would never leave our house. And I'm like, no, I totally get it, right? But like, you're talking about worldview. Like, just totally. So whenever I think about the Feast of Booths, I think about the way that we have a camping culture, outdoor culture within our country and lots of other countries. And these guys are just like, what? So their mind was just kind of blown at that point. But okay, so we talked the Feast of Booths. Back to John chapter 7. And then that was, like I said, reinstituted with Nehemiah and Ezra. So right here, after this, is when they first tried to arrest Jesus. And then we get into John chapter 8, where he meets the the woman who was caught in adultery, and he tells her, go and sin no more. Then he starts talking about, I am the light, and I am the truth, and the truth will set you free. And then, now he starts getting really, he's not trying to pull any punches anymore, right? Because they keep talking about the prophets and this and that and the other. And then they say, well, we're children of Abraham. This is in chapter 8. And he's just like, you're not children of Abraham, you're children of the devil. It's like, all right, well, you're not worried anymore. You're not trying to be under the radar, incognito. You're telling these guys that follow Abraham as the father of the Jewish religion, Abraham to Moses, and he's like, you're not children of Abraham, you're children of the devil. And he says, before Abraham was, I was. And they're just like, all right, that's it. So this is where we pick up, right? We're going to pick up at the very last verse, the last few verses of chapter 8, where it says 57. So the Jews said to him, you're not even 50 years old yet. You've never seen Abraham. And Jesus said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. All right, so that's where we pick up. That sets the stage for where we are right now in John chapter 9, all right? So I want us to read chapter 9 together. Then we're going to go back and just line by line talk about what the Lord has to say through this passage. So it says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And the disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with mud and said to him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. So we'll stop there for now. So what we see here is the disciples are walking on the road. This is right after Jesus slipped out and was keep from getting stoned, but he's like, no, I'm still going to keep doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So they come along to this blind man, and the disciples ask him, like, so who messed up, right? Who was wrong? Who sinned? Because this kid was born blind. It wasn't his fault, right? And then Jesus says he was born blind so that the glory of God might be shown in him right now. So Jesus has a plan, right? We're talking about a blind man. So probably that has tried many, many different things to restore his sight, to get his sight back. And so Jesus takes, and the blind man doesn't know what's going on, or at least it doesn't say he does. Because it's like, if you could see and somebody like spit in some dirt and wanted to put it on you, you'd probably be like, no thanks. True? I mean, I would, I'm not gonna lie. I'd be like, whoa, let's slow down a little bit. What are you doing here? But the blind man couldn't see what was going on. So Jesus spits on the ground, he makes mud, he packs it on his eyes. And then he tells the guy, go and wash in this pool of Siloam. Ironically, the pool means sent, right? And so he's sending him to the pool that means sent to wash off. So at this point, the man goes. He goes and he washes in the pool. And then what happens? He receives his sight. So how simple is that? What is the small part that this man had to play in receiving his sight was just to obey. Jesus didn't say, go and do this big, huge thing or this big, difficult thing. He said, go and wash in this pool and then you'll see. And the guy's probably like, I'm willing to try anything if I can see. Because I know I would do it just because I'm like, hey, if it doesn't work, what have I lost? Nothing. But the importance of it is the man's obedience in this situation. And I think that we feel lots of pressure in our lives sometimes, like to live up to this certain thing of like, what do we do? How do we please God? We obey him. So it's as simple as washing in your pool. And what does your pool look like? I don't know. But it's as simple as just following these little tiny things that God has given us. We don't need to climb Mount Everest to please the Lord. All we need to do is take that step that we're supposed to take. That small step. What pool? What is your pool this morning? That's what I would ask you. If the Lord is sending you or calling you or telling you to go somewhere and do a certain thing, what is that for you? What does that look like? So I'm asking you, let that come into your hearts. Lord, what is my pool of Siloam this morning? How can I obey you in just a small, tiny step? Do I need to step out and talk to this certain coworker? Do I need to be loving in a situation where I don't really want to be loving? Do I need to just randomly do acts of kindness for these type of people? These aren't like monumental, huge, life-changing decisions, but they impact people in life-changing ways. So this man goes and washes in his pool. So we pick up from there in verse 8, And it says, the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? And some say it's he, others say no, but it just looks like him. He kept saying, I am the man. So they went to him and said, how were your eyes opened? And he answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and I received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I don't know. So then we see everybody's looking at this guy and they're like, that's the guy who used to sit by the gate and beg. He could never see. Now he can see. No, that can't be the guy. It's just somebody that looks like the guy. And the guy's like, no, I'm the one. It's me, I promise. And they're like, okay, well then how did you see? So then he tells them the story. So what's he doing? Now he's immediately testifying about what the Lord has done. So this is a perfect example for us to follow. What are we supposed to do when God does something big in our lives? We need to share it. That's our job, to testify, to bear witness to what Jesus has done. So in this same sense, he's going and they're like, so how did you see? He said, well, a man named Jesus made mud and he put it together and he rubbed it on my face and I went and washed in the pool and then I could see. And they're like, well, where is he now? Because they're like, we don't believe you. Where is he now? He's like, I don't know where he is. So we're there, right? I don't know where he is. So then verse 13 says, they brought him to the Pharisees, the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So here we have this whole other problem. Like these guys are really big on the Sabbath. That's how they're chasing Jesus around in all the Gospels. That's how they want to get him. He's doing miracles on the Sabbath. He's doing this on the Sabbath. So it was the Sabbath when Jesus made some mud, which you're not supposed to do that. And you're definitely not supposed to heal somebody because that's way too big of a work to do on the Sabbath. That's the day you got to keep it holy. You can't be healing people. Makes a lot of sense, right? Whitewashed tombs, that's what we say, right? So it's like, so they take this guy to the Pharisees. He was making mud on the Sabbath. Verse 15, it says, so the Pharisees asked him how he received his sight. So the second time he's been asked. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes and I washed and I see. And some of the Pharisees said, this man's not from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. How lost are you? How much are you missing this thing? This can't be from God because it was done on the Sabbath. A blind man from birth just received his sight, and no, that can't be godly because it was done on the wrong day of the week. So it can't be from God. This man is not from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? Hey, that's a logical question. So if he's not from God, how can this guy see? It says, and there is how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? There was a division among them. That's at least encouraging. Some of them disagreed, right? Verse 17, so they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him? He who has opened your eyes. And he said, he is a prophet. Now, that might sound like, he downgraded Jesus, but he didn't because he didn't know anything else. The greatest honor you could have been bestowed in this society was to be referenced as a prophet. Because those are the people they look to. You keep hearing them talk about Abraham. You keep hearing them talking about Moses. They're going to bring Moses up later on in this chapter. So the greatest honor you could have was to be referenced as a prophet. So this man bestowed upon Jesus the greatest honor that he could possibly think of. And he's a blind man, so he's like unclean. He's never been educated. He's talking to the Pharisees. So he's not pulling any punches either. He's just like, I say he's a prophet. And he knows that's like shooting the moon, right? So he's not, he's blind, but he can hear. He knows the rules of their religion, so he says he is a prophet. And of course, the Jews didn't believe, this is verse 18, the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked him, is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see? So they don't believe him. They're like, this is just a fake. This is a farce. Let's call the parents. We'll ask them if he was actually really born blind. So he calls the parents. Verse 20. His parents answered, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he sees, we do not know, nor do we know who's opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself. Verse 22 says, his parents said these things because they had feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he's of age. Ask him. So he pulls the parents in. And the parents are like, yeah, this is our son. Yes, he was born blind. How he sees, we have no idea. And I'm sure they know. It's an assumption I'm making. I'm sure that they know that it just says that. They didn't want to say anything about Jesus because they were afraid of being put out of the synagogue, which was like a big deal. But it's like, your blind son from birth just received his sight. What are you doing? but they're afraid. So they shy away. So when they're asked, they say, well, you go ask him. That's his story. He's a grown man. He can answer for himself. We don't need to be put out of the synagogue as a result of this. So in verse 24, so for a second time, so this is the second time the Pharisees called him, but this is the third time he's going to be asked, because he was asked by the people who were arguing whether it was him or not. He was asked by the Pharisees the first time. This is the second time the Pharisees are asking. Verse 24. So they called him for a second time. They called the man who had been born blind, and said to him, give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner, that this man is a sinner. He answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. So they're calling him in. They're like, hey, give honor to God and confess that this man who healed you was a sinner. He said, look, I don't know anything about that. What I know is that I was blind, and now I can see. So it says, verse 26, they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Now, he's already told them this, and it wasn't complicated. There was 2 steps. 3 steps. He spit and made mud, put it on my face, I washed in the pool, I can see. So it wasn't like, oh, he said these words in Greek and Hebrew and mixed in this and, made a concoction. And, it was mud, eyes, wash, see. So he's probably frustrated because these are supposed to be educated people, but they're refusing this, what they consider unsophisticated or uneducated method of doing things, or that they just don't want to believe. So he answered them, this is verse 27. He had answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples? Oh, and they were mad about that, right? Now he's getting tired. He's like, all right, I'm getting tired of answering these questions. So I'm like, oh, hey, well, why do you want to hear it again? Maybe you want to follow him. And they're like, they reviled him, saying, you're his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. So we see the reverence that they have for the prophets, right? Because that's where he goes back and he says, look, you're his disciple. We're disciples of Moses. Moses is, highly elevated in this, in the Pharisaical belief system. And so we know that God's spoken to Moses, but we don't know where this guy comes from. Verse 30, the man said, why? This is an amazing thing. You don't know where he came from, yet he opened my eyes. And we know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. And he says in verse 32, never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And then, so he tells them, so how amazing is this? And he's like, so he starts teaching them without fear, giving testimony to his experience without fear. What I know is in the history of the world, no man that's been born blind has been healed, yet I can see this man did that. So if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born in utter sin, and would you teach us? And they cast him out. So I think we're seeing a little bit of this in our world right now, when it's like you kind of mic drop a certain thing and people are like, all right, that's canceled. We don't want that. So they're like, well, we're done hearing from you. You're cast out of the synagogue. And I feel like in our world that we're living in today, when we have a belief that is contradictory to what other people believe, a lot of times we get cast out of the synagogue, which of course is not the synagogue to us, but it's like, it's dangerous where we are right now. But this man was like, look, I was blind, now I see. I'm not worried. I'm not worried about what people think. I'm going to give testimony to what's happened in my life, give testimony to who this man is. So he says, you were born in utter sin that you would teach us. So you can't teach us anything. You're born a sinner. You were born unclean. You were born blind. You got nothing to say to us. And bye. That's kind of what happened. So Jesus heard that they cast him out, and he went and found him. And he asks him, this is in 35, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? So Jesus comes, he says, do you believe in the Son of Man? Well, I don't know who the Son of Man is. Can you tell me who he is? Because if me and you got a relationship, if you tell me to believe in something, I'm going to believe in it, because you did just give me my sight back from the time I was a kid, or before I was born. And Jesus said to him, you have seen him. How interesting. You have seen him, because he's the one who gave you your sight. And it's he who's speaking to you. And he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. And Jesus said, For judgment I came into this world that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. That's power. So it goes back to the same thing, the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Jesus said, I came so that the blind could see and the seeing would be blind. It's all backwards from the way that we think it's supposed to work. For judgment I came into this world that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. And some of the Pharisees, of course, were standing nearby, and they heard the things, and he's like, oh, are we also blind? And Jesus said, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains. So it's like in that situation, oh, are we blind? It's like, well, you should have hoped that you were. It'd better off if you were, or if you would just say, yeah, we're pretty blind. That would have been a pretty good way to go, a pretty good stance to take at that point in time. But they didn't. They're like, oh, kind of being like, sarcastic towards Jesus. And he's like, well, had you been born blind, you would be innocent. You would have no guilt. But now that you say that we see, so even though this gift of God was right in front of you and showed its power in front of you, and you have rejected it and you have denied it, then better off for you to have actually been blind in the first place. So when we look at this chapter of the Bible, one of my favorite things is the simplicity of it. Like what I shared with you earlier about the man's work in this was simply to obey and then to bear witness. So that's what we learn from the blind man, to obey Christ. What is your pull? Then we learn, how do we bear witness to what God has done, what the Lord is doing in our lives? But when we look at the three main parties in this chapter of Scripture, we have the blind man, we have his parents, and we have the Pharisees. Those are the three main parties that we have. And my question to you, church, would be, which one are you? Are you the blind man who has believed, obeyed, and bear witness, and you know that heaven is your home, Jesus is your Savior, you will be with him? Are you like the parents, or you're still on the fence, and you're not sure, and maybe you're a little afraid of what might happen to you if you follow Christ? Maybe you're afraid of what might be done to you if you really believe, obey, and bear witness to who Jesus is in your lives. But I would encourage you today to become like that blind man, to obey, to believe, to bear witness to who Jesus is in your life and what he's done for you. And perhaps, maybe some of us could be like the Pharisees and who are just still like, nope, don't want it. Got nothing to do with it. I just pray that if that's the case for you today, that the Lord would soften your heart and that you would become blind so that Jesus could open your eyes. That's what I would ask. That's what I would leave you guys with, to ask you, what is your pull? So what is your simple, small way to obey? How do you need to bear witness? And then which one of these three characters in this story are you today? Don't leave here today without having an assurance of who Jesus Christ is to you. Don't leave here today without Jesus Christ opening your blind eyes so that you might be innocent before him when the time comes. I'll ask James to come up and maybe play a little on the piano. I'll also ask Mike to come up, but we're here for you. If you want to know more, if you want prayer, if you want to become like the blind man, if you're saying you're not sure and I just want to talk to somebody, or you're saying, I just want, somebody to pray for me because I don't know what I want. We're here for you. I would ask that you guys come up and do that. Don't leave this place today without knowing and having a certainty of where you're going and who your Savior is, without your eyes being open so that you might be innocent. Thank you very much.